ESPN Stats and Info, through 3 weeks of the NFL season, only one team has lost all 3 of their games, the Raiders. The last team to be the only 0-3 team through 3 games was the 1959 Detroit Lions, who would go on to finish the season 3-8-1.
Wow, this is historic, dude. Josh Dubow, I don't know how he raises his game, but he maintains. I have never seen a guy pick a lane and just say so elite at that lane on Twitter
for so long.
At such a high clip of execution. I mean, he's been doing that since we've known him. I feel like I've known him my first year doing this with you. I mean, almost a 13, 14. I mean, it feels like 8, 9 years of him going strong.
Yeah. If you're listening to the podcast, Dubow said, wow, this is historic. Josh Dubow, noted Raiders moderate down the middle.
It's crazy. Like, obviously, as the Raiders have left, he goes to all the Niner games. But his social media presence, like he writes for the AP on the 49ers, his social media presence is just the Raiders lane of shitting on them. And because of the team that he tweets about so much, he's just been on the right side of the ledger so much of the time, right? You text me today, probably mid-afternoon game. You're like, do you know who the only winless team is? The only team that – how'd you put it?
The only 0-3 team in the league.
The only 0-3 team, because there is another winless team.
Texans are 0-2.
And I started thinking, I'm like, well, I guess the Chargers beat the Raiders. And then I was like, well, the Cardinals, they're losing again. Oh, they beat the Raiders. Titans were winless. Well, they just beat the Raiders. So 3 winless teams, their only wins have come against the Raiders, right? That are 1-2. All 3 of those teams are 1-2. Every team that has beat the Raiders is 1-2. They're 1-1. So I did the math there. And then you're like, don't forget the Texans. They have a tie, so they're 0-2-1. And you just start thinking, you're like, oh, the Colts just beat the Chiefs. Even the fucking Patriots got to win, right, against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Like, Steelers got to win against the Bengals. I'm just going through my head. I'm not even thinking you're coming at it from an angle. And then it's the Raiders. There is one team that's 0-3, and it's the Josh McDaniels Raiders. But the highlight of the Raiders' day is Paul Gutierrez, close friend of Mark Davis, flies on his plane. I like Paul, but he's in bed with Mark Davis.
Flew Southwest and Jet Suite X.
I think Mark kind of upgraded in recent memory.
Okay.
Raiders, I was in Vegas for 24 hours, guy. Business places are packed. Might be high inflation, and it is. There.
Raiders own Vegas?
I'd say the Aces I swear to God, guy, we're flying on the plane. Older gentleman from Chicago, lived in Vegas, he said, like 25 years. I'm glad I didn't talk to him early on in the flight because he was a talker. But early on, we start kind of BSing. He goes, you hear about the Aces? I'm like, did I hear about the Aces? You mean the WNBA champions owned by the one and only Mark Davis, who went out and hired Becky Hammond and handed her a trophy after they won the championship? Those Aces, he's like, they're champions. He was dead serious. And I got so much joy out of it. Mark Davis called Josh McDaniels into a room to have a one-on-one conversation. Never forget, guy. You and I have talked about this. It's been Marcus Thompson has written about this. Mark Davis, in the Jack Del Rio era, after losses, and trust me, they had a few bad ones, used to yell at coaches on the plane for things he didn't like. Yell at them. Well, then he hired a $100 million coach, and from what I was told, those days ended. There was no more yelling at assistants. Now, I think John took care of that, right? But Mark no longer, like, he hired John, paid him a premium. Even though they had some weird losses, he stayed out of that business. Is it safe to say that he's back entered that business of, letting his opinions be known of what he likes and doesn't like?
Only been emboldened.
After his championship?
Yeah, and moved the team to Vegas. He's not in Oakland. It felt like he wasn't surrounded by people that supported him in Vegas. I'm sure there's a lot of red ropes being pulled aside, a lot of Mr. Davis, your table's right here, right, rubbing shoulders with other people that are making moves and making money. And you start feeling, maybe I don't want to just be kind of a passenger along the way of this NFL franchise. I want to drive. You know what? Actually, Jeeves, bump over. I'll drive this time. And maybe he's taking the wheel.
I would say this. The first game I'm putting on Derek, those picks. Last game, probably combination a little bit of everyone. I watched a lot of that second half. it was an embarrassment from Josh, I thought. Delay games, then timeouts. It was pretty ugly. And I was putting this out on the social media streets. Nate Hackett has been shit on and dragged through that poop. Josh McDaniels had moments today that were Nate Hackett-like. Now, I think Josh, because of his name, he's so much more famous. I think the average NFL fan, whether you root or hate the Raiders, just, he's been a part of successful teams. You just have a higher thought of him. It's regardless of it's historic, because it kind of is, right? I mean, usually there's another 0-3 team. Just to not have a win, pretty ugly. But it is, I believed. I thought they were not only going to be competitive, I thought they were just going to probably be pretty good. It's utter disaster. I mean, today I know it ultimately came down to a 2-point play for a large period of time. Like they were down multiple scores. Even Raider fans were like, I've gotten some DMs like, could we convince Sean Payton this is a disaster? Today, from the but the game management stuff, it felt like Josh was. And then he said again after the game, we got to learn how to win. Like, no, Josh, you kind of need to learn how to win. Like your resume as a head coach, I mean, you lasted a season and a half. And I do think going back, that red flag, it just feels, for a guy that we want to feel buttoned up, the most buttoned up of all the New England guys, maybe is he closer to them than we think? He's just maybe a little bit better schematically. Because schematically, he's proven over the years. He kind of,
what he has differently than most, and the offensive guys have it, is they at least had a side of the football when they were in New England, right? But there've been a lot of offensive guys. Charlie Weiss was an offensive guy. Bill O'Brien was an offensive guy. Bill had success. Bill, who knows? Bill might be a head coach.
Josh would die to be Bill O'Brien, right? As a head coach.